You are listening to That Hoarder Overcome Compulsive Hoarding, combating stigma since 2021. I wanted there to be a podcast about hoarding disorder from somebody who hoarded rather than a professional. That didn't exist, so I created it. And that's this podcast that you're listening to now. Subscribe to the podcast and find my social media links, episode transcripts, and every link that I mention at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk. Finally, I am not a doctor. I'm just a hoarder doing her best. So do seek professional support if and when you need it. You might know Kendra Adachi as the host of the Lazy Genius podcast and the author of The Lazy Genius Way and The Lazy Genius Kitchen. But she now has a brand new book out, The Plan, Manage Your Time Like a Lazy Genius. So I am thrilled that she is here today to talk about planning, productivity, prioritising, and all the P's. Kendra, how are you?
Oh, I'm doing so well. Thanks for having me.
So myself, and I'm going to guess everybody listening, has had the experience of trying many approaches to planning, productivity, prioritising, but the plans end up in the bin, we get stuck. So can you explain, first of all, why do we keep failing at planning? What's going wrong?
Yeah, there's two big things, I think. The first is that the goal of most productivity voices and experts is they're encouraging us to be great at everything and to always be excellent and optimize and level up. You know, we're always like hustling to level up to the next thing. There is very little space for being where you are, being happy with enough, being okay with like C-level work in an area that doesn't really matter very much. There's just this constant churn of do better, be better. And that is an exhausting churn to live in. But most of us don't see that as an external churn. We don't see that in the water. We think we're the problem. We think we just can't get it together.
We do. We just think I've failed again. And we blame ourselves without ever questioning whether it's the systems that are being sold to us that are failing.
Right.
Can you talk a bit about that, about where the problem might actually lie?
Yeah. So my observation is that when we feel like we have failed at something, it means that there was a standard that we were supposed to meet. And the standard that is set for all of us has predominantly been set by men who are writing all these books. 93% of time management books are written by men. And it's not that their strategies or the things that they write aren't helpful or aren't sometimes very wise, that they are so woefully incomplete. Because 70 to 90% of the people who read those books are women. And I don't know if anybody knows this, but men don't usually run homes. They don't have periods. And if they're writing books, they probably don't have bosses.
And somebody's cooking their meals.
Someone's cooking their meals. Someone's washing their shirts. Now, that's not always. And, you know, I try to be really careful in speaking in generalizations, but also in general, it is fairly true that the expectations of a man's time are quite different from that of a woman. And whether that woman is married and has children or not, there are cultural expectations of what we should do. And sadly, and ironically, the support given to women is less than what is given to men in a lot of places. So if you think about it, if you're listening and you sort of have two checks against you. If you are a woman and you're also like, you know, I just kind of want to like live a good life. Do I have to be awesome at everything? Can I just sort of be here and be like reasonably happy and enjoy what I've got and honor the relationships I have and who I am today? Like, is there a time management approach for that person? And really, up until kind of now, there's not been, which is why we feel like we're always failing. There is a standard being set and a culture that has a goal that most of us don't agree with or want to abide by, set for people whose lived experience is not taken into account. So there's a lot of us that just sort of feel like up a creek with no paddle, and we feel like we're drowning. That's why we feel like we're drowning, because we kind of are, but we blame ourselves. Where's my paddle? I need to become a better swimmer. And it's like, no, you're in the wrong water, girl. You got to get out of this water.
Yeah, one of the things you talk about in the book is starting with where we are rather than where we want to go. And I found that a really powerful idea. It also, as somebody who hoards, brought up a lot of thoughts and feelings as well. I think part of the problem, a big part of the problem that people who hoard can face, is that where we want to be can feel such a long, long way away, like trying to cross the Atlantic in a rowing boat. So thinking of people who are legitimately overwhelmed in a genuinely overwhelming situation, might feel stuck, might feel they don't know what on earth to do. What are the benefits of starting where we are?
I think about, there are a lot of situations where this is true. Like you said, hoarding, grief, like if you lose someone, that's a long haul. Chronic illness. There are just fractured relationships, ended relationships. There are a lot of things that don't sort of fit into like our checklist, our, that life optimization plan. And you're right, when it's something that is so big, we think it needs a big solution. And in fact, it does. Like big problems, they require big solutions. And that is rather discouraging when we don't have a lot of energy to give to big solutions. Also, big solutions are so unwieldy. They are so hard to create and maintain. There's a lot of pressure on them. They truly are pass fail because there's so many components that you're trying to figure out. Like if there is if you're like, okay, I am going to move in a direction where I'm getting rid of everything. I'm cleaning it all out. I'm doing it, right? Whatever the problem is, whatever the hurdle, I don't even want to call it a problem. Whatever the hurdle is, the obstacle that we have, the bigger that it is, the more we want to get over it, but the less energy we feel like we have to do that. And so we just feel stuck. Big problems make us feel so stuck. And if you're living inside of a big problem, that's incredibly discouraging, I would imagine. And so my response to that is deeply annoying. It is so aggressively annoying. And I know it. Every time I say it, I know it. I hear it. It's the worst thing ever. But it is to start small, and it is to start small with where you are today. But here's why that's annoying, because every piece of advice we are given is based on bigness and greatness and accomplishment. So it feels insignificant, like it's not going to help. Starting small with where you are today feels like it doesn't get you anywhere. And isn't that the point? Isn't that the point, to keep moving and growing and leveling up? If that is the goal, whether you realize that's the lens you've been looking through or not, but I believe we all have been conditioned to look through that lens. If that is the lens that you are looking through, of course, small choices, small moments, small actions are going to feel like they're not enough. Because let's be real, if the goal is greatness and getting it all done, it's not enough. It's not. So Perhaps there is space for people who are tired of that way of seeing, or they're like, oh no, I didn't even know. I didn't even know that that's what was happening, but that's totally what's happening. If you're now like, the emperor is naked, the emperor has no clothes, the veil has been taken off, even listening to this, we need a new goal. And I believe a beautiful, worthy goal, instead of greatness, is integration, which is basically a way of describing wholeness and kindness to who you are today. So just imagine that. If your life is now seen through that lens, if your choices are looked at through that lens of, I said I was going to get rid of 5 things today, and I didn't do it. It just felt too hard. It felt too hard. I couldn't. Be kind to yourself in that moment. That's the new goal, is kindness. It is honoring the frustration and the anger or the sadness or the resentment or whatever you might be feeling. It's honoring who you are and where you are and being kind to yourself in that place. And sometimes from there, nothing else happens. And guess what? That's okay. That's actually wonderful. It's not settling. That's not like a stopgap measure where it's like, okay, well, I'll try again tomorrow. It's like that's still feeding this lens of greatness, this goal of greatness. But if you start to catch it and notice, like, oh, even the way I said that is looking through a lens of greatness and not in just contentment right here or being kind to who I am right now. The goal of integration does not exclude movement or growth or progress or even greatness. They are not exclusionary. But if you start with greatness, if that is your primary lens, you will always be behind. So if you shift your lens to, I'm going to be who I am today, and I'm going to honor that person, and I'm going to be kind to her no matter what happens. It's such an energy shift. Like it changes my body, like it changes how I feel in my body. It is completely different. And I do believe that when that becomes your practiced posture, it makes those small choices today matter. They feel valuable in a way they didn't before. That's really beautiful. It's human and it's beautiful.
I've had a very checkered history with goal setting over the years. I feel like
same.
I've tried every form of goal setting there is. And I will quite often go, right, to sort out the house. By the end of November, I will have done this. And by the end of December, I will have done that. And I fall at the first hurdle. And so I've not only failed at November, I've failed at the entire thing. And it's all awful.
That's exactly right.
And then I hate myself.
That's right. That's what happens. That's what happens every time.
And then I've got no motivation to improve my surroundings because I'm not worth doing that. It's a real cycle of awfulness.
It is.
And it was interesting, actually, to read your book because a month or so ago, I reframed it a bit for myself. And I just asked myself, by the new year, do you want your home to be better than it currently is, the same as it currently is, or worse than it currently is? And I thought I want it to be better than it currently is. No measurements, no anything, just generally better. And I've found that simplicity, if I'm making a decision about can I be bothered to take the rubbish out right now, it's raining, and I just go, but I do want things to be a little bit better by January. Mm-hmm. And sometimes just simplifying rather than overcomplicating. And when you were talking in the book about shrinking priorities, that made me think of that, in that I was kind of shrinking the scope of the goal, I think, and the pressure of the goal, but also this idea of shrinking your priorities feels related, but I can also hear listeners going, yeah, in a normal situation, sure, shrink your priorities, but this is chaos. There's no room to shrink my priorities. Everything's urgent. It all has to be done. How do you respond to that resistance that a lot of people have to that idea?
Mm-hmm. It's such a good question. So my first book was called The Lazy Genius Way, and it has 13 principles, lazy genius principles, because I was tired of, again, reading all these books that gave me systems. And I didn't need a system because life shifted too much to support a system. And so I thought, man, hold on. Are there principles that I live by? And sure enough, there were. And that was that book. One of those principles is go in the right order. Go in the right order. Sometimes we do things, we're taking the, quote unquote, right steps, but maybe if they were put in a different order, it would help. And honestly, I think when problems are too big, that principle, when taken at face value, is actually kind of defeating on its own. Because when you look at something, when you look at your surroundings or a just really extended season of, illness or grief, or you look around your home and you think, well, I don't have any concept of what the right order is. I don't have any concept of this. And so it's paralyzing because you don't know where to begin, because you feel like there is a correct place to begin, right? So I would like to offer perhaps the right order of this lazy genius principle is it's three things. It's name what matters, number one. Number two is calm the crazy. And number three is trust yourself with what comes next. Now, you might think, well, that's all about tangible things, or that's, looking at this room and I go, okay, well, name what matters. And then I have to calm the crazy. But you're like, this entire place feels overwhelming. And that's what I mean by calm. It's like the chaos of it all. What if instead that order and what matters and the chaos is our treatment of ourselves within? What if, as you say to yourself, I would like for this space to be a little better by the start of the year. Okay. What matters, I would like to offer to you right now. I believe that what matters in that is not that your space is a little better by the end of the year. It is that you have been kind to yourself in whatever choices you made. And on those days where you're like, I just don't have it, or I don't know, or I can't, I don't have the motivation or the task initiation or whatever the case may be, that what matters is not that you follow through. What matters is that you are kind to yourself, whether you follow through or not. And if I was going to say the word confront, and that feels aggressive, but if we look at big, overwhelming problems from a place of even reasonable small steps, it's still overwhelming. And if you don't begin with who you are, where you are, and the kindness that you show yourself today, it doesn't matter how many small steps you take, because even if you sort of meet that goal of things are better by the beginning of the year, but you white knuckled your way through it, you sacrificed your own humanity to get there, you beat yourself up about it. Is that really worth it?
Yeah. I mean, no. Yes, I agree. No, it's not worth it.
Oh, that was fantastic. So that concept, this is like the core of my work. This is what I want to seep into the crevices and cracks of everyone's life, is self-compassion, because we actually empower ourselves from a place of kindness and contentment and self-compassion towards our own selves, towards inward. there is something that makes the actual like behaviors that come from that. I'm not saying it's like a cheat code where you're like, well, if you're kind to yourself, you're actually going to follow through with what you say you're going to do. That's not really what I mean.
But it helps.
But it helps. It actually does kind of happen sometimes. And when you think about it, that makes a lot of sense. You know, if you're not just sort of your own, I used this in one book at one point, but, you know, I remember back in the day, it's problematic, but when there were those like weight loss shows and you have these like really intense weight loss coaches and they're just like berating you, but also like for the sake of the future. You know, it's like you're going to kill yourself now for this future thing. And unless you're like an Olympic athlete or and even then I don't think it's super healthy, or you know, you're like a brain surgeon and excellence and greatness is actually like a core component of the profession. You know, like there are places where greatness is actually really a beautiful thing, but we have been taught that it's the rule, not the exception, and it is 100% the exception. But what is missing from so much of our conversation is this self-compassion is, hey, you don't have to get it all right. Like you're going to mess up a lot. And that doesn't mean that you should beat yourself up about it. Like you don't have to be your own like mean motivational coach and hustle your way through. You can be still and kind where you are. And you actually create more momentum from that place. But that's just not a very sexy sell. We like hustle too much.
I regularly reassure myself at work when I've done something wrong, or when I'm worried I'll do something wrong. I'm not a brain surgeon. It is fine. If I make a mistake, it's fine.
It's fine. Yeah. And I often hear, you know, I'm a recovering perfectionist, and I do hear in my head quite often, even my saying that to you, like, it's fine. You can mess up. Like you can be mediocre at some things. You can have the same hope for how you live for years and years and years. And it takes such a long time to get there. Like there are things that we can hold a lot more contentedly and loosely as a core tenet of how we live, where everything else pours from that, than we do. And even I in my head, it's like, but isn't that lazy? Isn't that sort of like giving up on your life? Isn't that like we have these phrases and these voices, and you know, there's a resistance to contentment. And I'm not sure where that comes from. I don't fully know. I do think a lot of it is the culture we live in, that is just not something that is in the air we breathe. Contentment is, I mean, that's not a great marketing campaign. A friend of mine said that contentment does not stimulate economic activity.
Yeah.
Which makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is perfectly kind of brings me on to my next question. I always like it when that happens. I hope you're finding this episode useful. If you want the amazing feeling that comes with supporting something you truly appreciate, you can donate to support the podcast. If that's not possible at the moment, leaving a review and sharing the show with others who would benefit from it are also incredibly helpful. Every contribution, big or small, helps a lot. Find out more at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/support. One of the things you talk about in the book, and indeed have just talked about now, is how contentment is the antidote to optimization, and how we need to seek and find contentment if we're going to have a chance at any of this life. And rationally, I agree with this. I would tell anybody this about themselves. But I also get the fear within me when I think about that for me, that if I allow myself to kind of sink into contentment, then I will not do what I need to do. If I feel content now, what if all my motivation disappears? Because what if my motivation to take action relies on discomfort now, leading to contentment later?
Mm-hmm. So contentment is not giving up. And I think that's a really important distinction. Contentment is not giving up. I believe contentment is an awareness of your present and noticing the good that is here with you now. And in some seasons, in some homes, and some circumstances, that could be really hard to find. And yet it's a worthwhile exploration. Sometimes the only thing that feels good about right now is, well, I'm not beating myself up about it. That's really good. And I'm really grateful for that. And that's enough. That's enough right now. So when we think about contentment, and I do think that this is sort of implicitly, occasionally explicitly communicated in advertising and obviously in the time management space, that if you give up, it's either try hard or give up. Like those are your only two options.
Yeah, so contentment feels like giving up.
It feels like giving up, but it's not.
No.
It's not. They're two very different things. Contentment is soulful. It can be joyful. It's deeply kind. It's honoring where you are. And when where we are is not perhaps where we want to be, ideally, I think that gives us a beautiful opportunity to examine why we want to be where we want to be in the first place. If you're like, well, I want to do this because I want to be the kind of person that, or, what I'm doing right now is not, it's not, you start to put qualifiers on your own life. And so you're seeking this ideal, but is it through a lens of greatness or through a lens of wholeness? Because I believe that if you look at it through a lens of wholeness, of integration, you might recognize it is more challenging for me to be aware of what I need to triage the tasks of life, to clean this room. This is difficult. This makes this difficult. And I'm not a bad person. I'm not a bad person. So if I look at this through a lens of wholeness, as I want to be a whole person, and I am a whole person right now. The parts of me that are here right now are here. They are connected, even if my environment or my circumstances don't necessarily match what my mental image of an ideal life looks like. But if we notice that when we're in that place, if we catch ourselves turning contentment into giving up, it's an opportunity to turn it back around for what it is and to ask ourselves, well, actually to state what there is good here right now. I might not be able to see it. I'm having a hard time naming it. I'm honestly too sad right now to name it. I'm too overwhelmed and discouraged to name it. But I'm going to believe that in this moment, there is good here right now where I am, because I am here. Because I am here. And that is enough for right now. And you could live 2 years, 20 years, where that is what you say to yourself every day. I think that if you were that kind of person towards yourself, more than the other way of get it together, you would experience slow movement in a direction that matters to you, because your lens is different. Your goal is different. Your posture towards yourself is different. And you see value in contentment, that it's not giving up, that it's seeing the good and it's honoring where you are. And that posture does take practice. I think that's important to say. It does take practice. It's not like I don't mean practice in the sense of like like a water chart where you're, checking off how many glasses of water you drank or whatever. I hate those, by the way. It's fine if anyone uses them. I think we chart too much. I think we measure too much, and it takes us out of our lives. So I'm not saying you should measure your contentment.
Yes, we don't need graphs.
We don't need graphs. We don't need graphs. We don't need boxes. But we do need kindness. And the longer you practice kindness, the more at ease you are with your present, which makes you have a different perspective on your future and how to move towards it. That's why none of this is, again, it's like not a very sexy sell, because I'm like, be kind for as long as it takes. That's all. That's all.
Because I keep having to stop myself from thinking, okay, I'll be kind to myself so that
Right.
I can, I can do the things.
That's right.
And I keep spotting it as you're talking even and thinking, no, I can be kind to myself, full stop.
Full stop. That's right.
And at one point in the book, you say, if getting ready for our future comes at the expense of our present, we will always feel discontent. And you were talking about that in the context of planning, productivity, that kind of thing. But it struck me that it really resonated in a hoarding sense as well. I can't get rid of this because later I might need it. I can't get rid of this. Someone else might want it later. I can't get rid of this. It might end up in the wrong place later. And all of that happens at the expense of our present, all of it. So how do we break out of this future-focused thinking?
From a practical standpoint, as you were saying that, and I don't want to forget the essence of the actual question, but I think it's really important to name that there is often an all or nothing mindset in most things that we live with. But the way that you were just describing, like, if I get rid of this thing, what if, right? And so really we think perhaps that our only choices are to just live with all we have or to get rid of everything. It's kind of like, I call this big black trash bag energy, where you're just like, throw it all out. Let's go. And maybe you get that like moment of motivation or something. And I think that tends to happen, like in my house with, when my kids just leave their stuff everywhere. And I'm like, you guys get it in my head. I'm like, get it together. So, that's a fairly relatable energy. But what I'm noticing and what you're sharing is that actually, perhaps with hoarding, and help me unpack this from your experience, that all or nothing energy, well, you don't have the option of all because of what you just said, because of this fear that you will need this thing later.
Yeah.
And therefore, your only other option is to do nothing. Does that resonate?
Yes, it's a kind of paralyzing thing. And also, I can't have the nice things because I've got all the things. And so it can feel like there's no in between.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's just really paralyzing.
Yeah. And that's that paradox spectrum.
Yeah.
I sometimes get those words mixed up, but that all or nothing option that we're given is one that we are given in so many places from so many experts. And it's try hard or give up. It's do it all. It's do nothing. It's care about everything or care about nothing. And there is such a wide middle between those two extremes. And perhaps to answer your question about, that future, the obsession with the future kind of robbing us of our present, it makes me think about and you just saying like you don't have space for the nice things because you have all the things. It reminds me of a primary tenet of what I teach, which is you have to name what matters to you. And we often have to name what matters in our season of life. We have to make it kind of smaller because our seasons change, our priorities change, our health changes, our family structure changes. There's so many seasons that we go through. Depending on where you live, the literal season changes how you live, right? So we need to look at our lives on a smaller scale, and name what matters during that particular season. But one of the biggest pushbacks I get whenever I teach name what matters is, well, so many things matter though. So many things matter. And it reminds me of what you just said. It's like you lose the perhaps the energy toward or the enjoyment of things that truly do matter a lot to you, that bring you joy, that bring great function, that bring pleasure, that bring great help in whatever it is you're doing. I'm talking like tangible things in your home, and you're not able to experience those things that matter because everything matters. And when everything matters, nothing can. And when everything matters through the lens of the future, well, definitely nothing can, because you can't control the future. But if you're trying to prepare for every scenario with every item, then there's no recourse. And so if there's a shift in some part of that sort of sentence there of, okay, what season am I in my experience of hoarding? Where am I right now? And then, okay, and make that season as small as you can. And then to go, okay, what matters the most? And if you can't say most, maybe like 3 things, but try to make the list fairly small. And then sit with that, live with that, with kindness for as long as it takes. And you can say, okay, does this matter enough for me to take one small step today? And some days it does, and some days it doesn't. But rather than looking at it as all or nothing, or looking at it as everything I have will be needed at some point, if you reframe it as, what if I try to enjoy where I am now in this one small space by creating space for that thing? What would that look like? Is that a process I can take? I don't want to simplify it or be like, that is accessible to everyone who hoards, or because I know that sometimes that's not as simple as that. Maybe oftentimes it's not as simple as that. But if you have the alternate thought process, if you hold a different mindset of get it together, or hold it all for the future, or you're never going to overcome this. Like if that's, did you hear my voice even get louder? Like I got meaner, even saying it out loud. I got meaner, and I'm not even talking to anybody about it right now. Like it's just examples. Like if that's the energy you hold in your body, there will be no movement, whether it is emotional, mental health movement or physical in your room movement.
Yeah.
So what do you have to lose? That's kind of how I see it. Like, what do you have to lose by being kind? What do you have to lose by being content?
Like beating myself up for 47 years hasn't got me where I was aiming.
Exactly. Like if we look back and we go, wait a minute, well, this actually has not worked very well. I don't know what I'm trying to prove here. Like maybe we try something different. I don't know. And that's the thing. It's like, I do believe that it will work. And even that word, like it's going to work, makes it even feel more mechanical than it is. But like, I believe it will, but even if it doesn't, what do you have to lose? You'll just be where you are now. And you probably will be where you are now if you stay in the posture of get it together or give up.
Can we talk quickly about trusting ourselves? Because that's one of the themes in your work, trusting ourselves to work out the solution. I often don't trust myself at all to work out the solution. I know that a lot of people don't. Some people listen to this podcast in case I've got the solution, but I'm reading your book and your podcast and other books and other podcasts to see if they've got the solution.
Sure.
You're reading other books and listening to other podcasts to see if they... And seeking advice and support and inspiration can absolutely be a great thing. But ultimately, we do have to trust ourselves to take a step at least. How can we ease into that?
If for the women listening, well, for the men listening, you might be like, what are you talking about? Because I have truly, I don't think I've ever met a man who chronically struggled with trusting himself. That is culturally not something that men tend to experience because they are the trusted ones in pretty much every room.
And that brings a different pressure.
Of course it does. Absolutely. Of course it does. That there is it's not
that expectation to have the answers, I guess.
That's right. Right. It's not an us versus them. It's just a different set of, like you said, expectations and different set of problems. But for women, I think that women are the ones who tend to struggle with trusting themselves. And in the same way that our inability to perfectly plan and follow through and prioritize all the time is really not our fault. It's the system that we live in. A woman in particular's lack of trust in herself, for those who experience that, I believe is ultimately also not her fault. It is a result of the system. And so when we sort of see it, I say in the book, it's like the Matrix, it's like red pill or blue pill. Like, do you want to see it? Do you want to see the mechanics? Do you want to see all the messiness behind the curtain? But when you do, there is a sense of freedom there that you actually have the, I don't want to say the ability, but there is more of an empowerment and an invitation to trust yourself when you're like, oh, it's not actually me that's untrustworthy. It's that I just haven't had my voice honored very much. And those are two very different things. So starting from that place, I think is really important. It's just recognizing that our lack of trust in ourselves is really has nothing to do with us most of the time. But as we all have to move forward in trusting ourselves, I think we do it with kindness. We do it with an acceptance that we might get it wrong. And that doesn't mean that we're untrustworthy. It means we just got it wrong.
Yeah.
Like it just means that we were like, oh, that didn't go the way I thought it would. That's all right. Let's pivot. Let's try again. It's not a failure. We see it as like, one strike you're out. And that's completely unrealistic and inhumane. That's just not how we make mistakes every day. So to kind of like see it as it's yet another thing we measure, like that we're sort of subconsciously tallying how many decisions we make that don't work. When really it's not necessarily it's not always our decision. It's just life does stuff, man. Like they're just stuff that happens and we have to pivot around that stuff. But we see it as a judgment on our own ability to understand our lives and therefore tell ourselves we're not trustworthy, which is an easy thing to tell ourselves because implicitly and in the water, that's what we're getting from other places.
And we only remember the times we trusted ourselves and it didn't work.
100%.
We don't really give ourselves credit for the times we trusted ourselves and it did work. For the times we're out and we go, did I lock the door? And we did lock the door. We only remember that one time 14 years ago when we got home and realized we hadn't locked the door.
Right. That's right. And then what we often do with that kind of thing is we're like, oh, well, I need a new system to help me remember to lock the door. No, you did it one time. It's okay. You don't have to make a big system for everything. It's all right. It's such an honor to me to have these conversations with people who are curious about this way of seeing the world, because it will never cease to amaze me how pervasive and harmful this message of productivity really is. And when you start to see it, you see it everywhere. Like you just are like, oh, wait. Oh, that's right. I was trying to build this system here because of this pressure to optimize everything and fix it on the, at the jump. And when you start to see it, oh, there's just this wonderful sense of peace that is just the kindest companion to go, oh man, I don't have to see the world this way. I don't have to see my stuff or my to-do list or expectations. I don't have to see them through this lens anymore. I can choose a different way. It might be slower, but it's definitely kinder. And actually it's probably not slower because, again, most of us don't really move when we're beating ourselves up to do it.
So if people want to find your podcast, your website, your books, where can they do that?
The best place is the lazygeniuscollective.com. You can find information about all 3 books that I've written. My podcast, we have an episode every Monday. And, the mailing list, all the good stuff is the lazygeniuscollective.com.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Honestly, the book is great. It very much is a vibe that I've been thinking around, but you put it all together really nicely. I really liked it.
Thank you for having me.
If you've been wondering how you can support the podcast, there are more ways than just by donating. It really, really helps if you leave a review, share the podcast with your friends or on social media, link to the podcast from your website, or just follow me on social media and send me the occasional hi. Find out more at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/support. Shout out this week to the Conversations with Carolyn Spring podcast. I recommend this podcast heartily if you want to listen to somebody who talks about trauma in such an informed and experienced way. It's incredible, really. She's a very impressive woman. So I will link to Conversations with Carolyn Spring in the show notes. Have a listen to what she says about beating ourselves up for how we feel.
If I beat myself up for having those feelings, I'm then doubling the burden. I'm making a difficult situation twice as hard because not only do I have the original feelings of overwhelm to deal with, but I also then have the feelings of shame and inadequacy and guilt and badness that I've heaped upon myself to deal with as well. A number of years ago, when I grasped this concept for the first time, I made a deal with myself that I wasn't going to do that. Self-compassion says, hey, you're having a hard enough time as it is dealing with these feelings of overwhelm. I'm not going to make it worse for you. I'm going to support you in it.
And I suspect you, like me, could relate to a fair bit of that. Okay, thank you for listening, and I will speak to you next time. Thank you for listening to That Hoarder Overcome Compulsive Hoarding podcast. It's been a pleasure to have you on board. You can find all the links I've mentioned and a transcript of the episode online at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk. To find out more about how you can support this podcast and the overall project, go to overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/support and do subscribe to the podcast so you make sure you don't miss any future episodes. There may be links in this podcast that earn me money. This doesn't come at any extra cost to you if you make a purchase through those links, and it helps to support the podcast.